Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Going the Distance with Go Long. I am here with Liz Ward, who is a registered dietitian nutritionist. That's RDN, right? That's how you say it?
Yes.
All right. So she's been in clinical practice and she's going to talk about all of her experience. But I am so excited about this recording. This broke the record for how many questions I got when I hit all my clients up for questions. This kind of just broke the record. So we're going to get into as much as possible. It's going to be jam-packed. Go Long is personalized coaching in your pocket. Basically, you get personalized coaching via text. And the purpose of these conversations with experts like Liz is to bring practical, sensible guidance for topics that impact women 40 plus, particularly women with autoimmune, going through menopause, all the things, because there is so much BS out there. And Liz also is from the Northeast and has that no-nonsense Northeast sensibility that I love, even though we have differing sport team loyalties. But I feel like we can still be friends. So anyway, Liz, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So talk a little bit about your experience and how, perhaps when you started your career, you weren't thinking about maybe menopause or anything like that and focusing on that. And now, that's what you focus on. So let's talk about your story.
Okay. Well, as you said, I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. And when I started my career in my 20s, I didn't even have pregnancy on the radar, never mind menopause. And as it turns out, I became enamored of women's nutrition and women's health and wrote a book about pregnancy nutrition on maternity leave after my first baby. And I wrote another book about it a couple of years ago after that. And then kind of wrote what I was going through, and then wrote more books about feeding young children. And then as my best friend from college, Hillary Wright, my co-author on this menopause book, and I were getting older, we kept asking each other questions about menopause, especially menopause nutrition, because we wanted to know what to tell our clients and our patients. And we were curious about it for ourselves, and we couldn't find any good information out there. So we decided to write a book. And that's really how the Menopause Diet Plan came about. So all through that time when I was writing that, I was also seeing a lot of patients and working in hospitals and things like that, and working in doctors' offices. And I got a lot of material, and Hillary still does see patients, and she gets a lot of material from her patients because, as you said, like this topic broke the record in terms of, questions being asked. And so, we just gathered that information and decided that, this is probably what women want to hear about. And then, wrote a book about how the body changes and what to expect with the changes, because there's no manual, right?
Right.
It's not like at 40 you get a manual and said, here's to the next 30 or 40 years of your life. Nobody really talks about it. Of course, they talk about it way more now than ever before. But in talking about it, and there's a lot of good information and there's a lot of misinformation. And that's what you alluded to in the intro as well.
All right, let's get into it. So by far, the number one question that came in was around GLPs and impact on menopause. Like most of my clients are on some kind of GLP-1 or semaglutide. I can't pronounce it, but Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, all the different types. So people want to know, like, what do they need to know when they're taking these therapies, but also managing all the crazy associated with menopause?
Well, these drugs, the GLP-1, they're called GLP-1 agonists, they don't act any differently in your body just because you're going through menopause. And there are basic things that everybody on them needs to be aware of. One is that, of course, they are decreasing your appetite. And isn't that really what, part of the reason how they work. I mean, they're finding new ways about how they work every single day and what effects they have. It seems like there's a new study every day. But the main thing when it comes to weight loss is the suppression of your appetite. Now, in that suppression, you have to be very, very careful because you don't want to starve this weight off because you can do that. And there are plenty of people that, their appetite is so low that they're not only losing fat, they're losing muscle and bone. And this is where the concern comes in. We need to make sure that people are getting enough protein and enough calories because, again, we don't want the weight just pouring off, 10 pounds every week kind of a thing. We want it to be slow and steady, and we want to use these drugs as an adjunct to a healthy diet, not to replace it. Because if you look at the studies say that, a lot of people stop taking these drugs at about a year. And, the weight, if you haven't changed your eating habits, the weight may come back on. So we don't want to use the drugs as a crutch. We want to use them as an adjunct therapy to a healthy lifestyle. So that said, making sure that there's enough protein, there's enough calcium and vitamin D and lots of other, and fiber, right? And vitamins and minerals, while also working out and doing resistance training to help preserve muscle tissue, which is so critical for overall health, not just appearance. Muscle is a metabolic machine that protects you against a lot of chronic conditions. We need to preserve that. It's not just about getting the weight off. And the other thing that can possibly happen is that you have so many gastrointestinal side effects that these drugs just aren't for you, and they're not for everybody, but they are good for a lot of people.
Yeah, I love how you talk about using it as like an adjunct to making like these more wholesale changes.
Yeah.
And that's honestly what I do is, trying to get you to think about the habits that put you in a position to be successful. When you hear about people going off after a year, is that because they've experienced more of the side effects and they're like, or they're just like, all right, I'm at a good weight, I'm cool?
I'm not sure what the reasons are. Sometimes it's price. Sometimes it's the cost.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of insurance companies that aren't paying the full cost or aren't paying at all. And, after a while, it just gets to be too much. And I think also sometimes these drugs, the effect of these drugs remind me of all the many fad diets I've seen come and go. I get the weight off. I don't need the drug anymore. And if you talk to any reasonable endocrinologist who, deals with people on these medications, he'll tell you probably need these for life. Because obesity is a disease, and having obesity may mean that, it's like high blood pressure or,
right.
Or something else that you'd have to take a medication for. You can't control this obesity without these medications. And that is the case for many, many people.
Yeah, like diabetes example, you know what I mean? Where
Exactly.
if you're insulin dependent, it's very hard to move away from being insulin dependent.
It's next to impossible,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
There's a medication for you to control your blood glucose levels. You have to be on it.
So the other thing that you talked about, which I think is interesting related to these therapies, is around, making sure that you're still consuming like your fiber, you're consuming enough protein. And I've heard of stories where people aren't consuming carbs, and we can get into the whole like carbophobic thing. But people, they're just like, they're so focused on, say, getting to a certain number, right? As opposed to, say, trying to improve their health, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm trying to be very cautious with my wording here. But what is the implications of not following the dietary guidelines that are given to you either by someone like yourself, someone who, yes, maybe you're not doing clinical practice, but you are a clinician, like you do have that background.
Right.
Between a clinician or a doctor saying like, okay, you're going to take this, and then they don't follow the guidelines around nutrition. What can happen?
Yeah, a lot can happen. And as I mentioned earlier, you could have a significant amount of muscle loss, which is hard to get back. It's really hard to build that back. It's not impossible, but you can do it. Also, bone tissue loss. That you're probably not going to get back as easily as muscle tissue, especially as you get older. It just gets harder and harder to build back muscle and bone. What we want to do is preserve what we have, especially since menopause is giving us the old 1-2 punch there with decreased levels of estrogen in the body. So those are the two big ones. The other thing that is concerning is the low fiber intake, which affects your gut microbiome, which is the environment, in your gut, the community of microbes that live there. And fiber feeds the beneficial bacteria in your gut, and they make compounds that keep the gut, strong and healthy and resistant to disease. But the entire body depends on the gut for wellness, including the brain, which is part of the body. But a lot of times people kind of separate the brain out. So that's another concern. The other thing is your body stores some nutrients, for example, iron. If you're, perimenopausal or premenopausal, iron stores could be compromised because you're not eating enough food, which, is not good in terms of energy levels. It could produce fatigue. So there's a whole host of things that go along with, problems from not eating correctly, whether you're on these GLP-1s or not.
Right. So this leads kind of to, we're going to jump around a little bit, but this was the second most popular question.
Okay.
Protein.
Yes.
How much protein am I supposed to eat? Keep being told I need to be eating all the protein. Are all proteins created equal, like animal versus plant?
So much there. And
there is so much there. So Liz, let's break it down. So everyone's being told, like in this demographic, protein.
Yeah.
Is that a fad, or is that based in science, or maybe it's somewhere in between where, of course, there's nuance, which doesn't seem to be a lot of nuance in today's world, but give it to me.
There's not a lot of nuance on the internet because you're getting small little snippets of information. And you're also getting people that are not following the science, quite frankly. So protein is one of my pet topics. I absolutely love talking about protein. So let's talk about amount first. Perimenopause, menopause does not increase your protein needs. Now, having said that, many women are not eating enough protein, so that when we tell them what the protein guidelines are, it's a lot more than they may have been eating. So they feel like, wow, that's a big jump. So according to the research, and believe me, I've written about this many, many times, and I was just quoted in the New York Times last week in a study about protein and perimenopause, and there were like 3 researchers, in there who I always listen to. The ideal amount is anywhere between 1 and 1.6 grams of protein a day per kilogram. So when we do scientific studies, they're done in the metric system. So you're probably like, what's a kilogram? How do I figure that out? You take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2. That's what you weigh in kilograms. And then you multiply that. If you multiply it by 1, that's easy, right? If you weigh 70 kilograms, you need 70 grams of protein a day, bare minimum. Or you could need, about 1.5 times that. You could go that high. You do not need 1 gram of protein per pound, which is what a lot of influencers are out there saying now. There's no science to back that up. And a lot of women are like, oh, I could never eat that much protein. I could not eat that much protein. And I love all protein containing foods. Right. I just feel like that would be the focus of diet, and I don't want to do that. So you probably don't need as much as you've been hearing, and there's a wide range of needs. I would go as high as 1.6 if I was trying to lose weight, because that would help you to preserve your lean tissue while you are losing fat. And that's, again, everything I'm saying is based in science.
Right.
Every single thing.
Well, that's why I reached out to you, because I wanted the science. I don't want the I saw an article yesterday that talked about that strength training improves sleep. And I'm like, where is, I wish that were true. Because then I'd be crushing my sleep.
Yeah.
I'd be completely
What
crushing
are we all? Why am I not sleeping? I mean, 3 times a week, lifting heavy weights at the gym. Why am I not sleeping? So, I mean, yeah, sure. Exercise in general is shown to improve sleep, but no, there's never one single thing.
Yeah, it's multifactorial for sure.
Yeah.
So are all proteins created equal? So, there's plant versus animal based. And then one of my clients said, she's like, well, Chobani now has a yogurt that has an added protein thing. And she's like, is that marketing? Is that really valuable? Is it worth paying the extra money? And I actually did the math before, and it didn't seem like there was that much of a protein bump.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But what do you think in terms of all proteins created equal and whatnot? Because we have people here who all kinds of diets, vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, carnivores.
Right. So no, all protein is not created equal. Protein is made up of amino acids. Amino acids are either essential or they call them non-essential, which is certainly kind of a weird terminology for them, because they all are necessary. But if a nutrient is essential, that means that your body can't make it and you have to get it from food. Animal foods supply the amino acids, all the essential amino acids in the right proportions. Their digestibility is good. They're absorbed well. Amino acids go into your body chops them all up into their little units and then reconstructs them into cells for your hair, cells for your brain, cells for your muscles. Okay. So you need to get all the amino acids. Plant foods have amino acids. They don't have, most plant foods, there are some exceptions, so I'll get to in a second, the amino acids in the right proportions, but they have the amino acids. So when somebody is a vegan, they need to make sure they get a wide variety of plant foods so they're getting all of the essential amino acids too. Soy is an exception.
Good. This is good because I got a question about soy, so this is great.
Is a plant food that has all of the essential amino acids. So anything that's soy, with the exception of soy sauce and things like that, is a complete, amino acid array and can be substituted for, let's say, an animal food directly. Okay. Pistachios also have complete protein. Quinoa has complete protein, but you would have to eat a lot of it to get a lot of protein. But that's fine. Quinoa is good for other reasons because it's a whole grain. So, and buckwheat, I think, is also a complete protein. So there's very few plant foods that have all of the essential amino acids. The thing about animal foods that doesn't get talked about a lot is they're rich in an amino acid called leucine. And leucine triggers muscle protein synthesis specifically. Now, plant foods also have leucine. So you can get, and soy is a good example of food that has leucine in it, but not as much as, animal foods. So relying on animal foods really helps to trigger muscle protein synthesis. So making muscle tissue and retaining it.
So you talked about soy. I've heard this, and again, I'm not speaking as an expert on this. I'm going based on what I've heard. Is there different types of soy that aren't as good quality? Is there, even with meats, there's certain meats that have higher protein, more bang for the buck in terms of protein versus the fat and whatnot. What about with soy? Is there that demarcation?
I like to stick with the whole soy foods, which, like roasted edamame or edamame in the pod, that you can buy in the freezer. Fabulous source of protein and fiber. Tofu, tempeh, But anything that like soy protein powder added to a granola bar or something like that, it's good, but I favor the whole food because that whole food is giving you all of the other wonderful attributes. For example, tofu and tempeh have more phytoestrogens in them. And phytoestrogens may, in some women, help to decrease hot flashes. So you're going to get a lot more. Plus the fiber, like I said, in like the edamame beans, you're getting that. So I tend to veer away from the more processed soy stuff to the more whole foods.
So what you brought up was around the protein bars, right? And because I had a question around protein shakes versus protein bars. And then even a couple of weeks ago, I went and had my dental checkup and we were talking about RX bars. My husband eats RX bars. I don't like the texture of them. And it turns out that's a good thing because they were talking about how RX bars, even though you can understand all the ingredients in them, that's their marketing, they're terrible for your teeth.
Yeah. Well, they're terrible for your teeth if you don't brush your teeth.
Yeah.
I don't think they're any worse than a raisin or a prune.
Okay.
The idea is that I just wrote a Substack. I'm going to post tomorrow about.
All right. Well, by the time this gets released, we will link to it. We'll show it here.
Yes. So I'm familiar with all this stuff. It's the fermentable, all that stuff is fermentable carbohydrate, which means it can, and it sticks to your teeth and it causes it feeds the bacteria.
Right.
Bad bacteria that cause acid production that make little holes in the enamel in your teeth, which can become cavities. But if you eat an RX bar and then, 15, 20 minutes later, you brush your teeth and you floss, it's all gone. I mean, there's really nothing, but, I think it's the constant intake of snacking all day, which is much worse for your teeth than and not brushing and not getting that stuff off your teeth than the actual food itself.
If you have, that was really helpful how you clarified that. If you are dealing with like the busy mom who's like on the go and they're like, protein bar or protein shake. And I know that also with shakes, it depends on how much else you put in there, right? To make it like, say, a meal replacement shake. Like, what is your take on all that?
I think it's easier to get what you need if you make your own shake. If you use like a whey protein powder or pea protein or soy protein, depending on what you want. I think it's easier to, get enough protein, put some fruits and vegetables in there or just fruit if you want. And to really it's more of a complete meal, if you will, or closer to a meal. Whereas a bar, it's like whatever they're giving you is, what's there. And I doubt there's any fruits and vegetables in there. So in terms of balance, I think you could do really well with the protein shake as opposed to a bar. But again, bars should be used when you're in a tight spot.
Yeah.
And I know, I have 3 children. I know about tight spots.
Right.
Yeah. So I get it. But every day, probably not a good idea.
I find that with the shake versus the shake leaves me more satiated over a period of time than the bar. The bar feels like almost like a chocolate bar. Right?
Yeah. It's a candy bar. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's just my personal thing where and I also feel like I have more control over the ingredients because like I research my protein powder and it's easier to figure out what's in there. And then I know I'm putting in like spinach or, almond butter or whatever. And I know exactly what is in all those things. Whereas like a bar,
right,
I literally have zero confidence.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's a fixed amount of ingredients, like it's X amount of protein. Well, if you're like, well, I want more than that, you know what I mean? It's also cheaper to make your own shake, I think, too.
Yeah.
For all the nutrition that you're getting, it may not be like cheaper on paper, but I think for everything that you're getting, it's such a bigger bang for your buck.
Yeah.
That it's more economical, relatively speaking.
Yeah. If I think about what my protein powder costs versus like what a bar costs, like, how many things I get in my jug of protein powder.
Right.
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 So you brought up another thing that was interesting, and I wanted to just bring it back because a couple people asked this question. And what I love about this one person who really framed the question, she has 2 daughters who are in their late teens, and she's very focused on strength training, and she's trying to make sure that they stay focused on strength training. But so her questions are about her, but also about her daughters. And she wants to understand if your nutrition requirements change over time. When you are, you're before perimenopause, right? You're having your period, right? And you're before perimenopause, then there's perimenopause, and then there's postmenopause. Like, what do you advise people in terms of do they have to shift their nutrition?
Yes. I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with aging, as much as it has to do with nutrition. So before menopause the menopause transition concludes, you still have, some hormones, running around, even though they're like running on a roller coaster.
Right.
And you feel like a rabbit on a wheel sometimes. You probably need to get really smart about how you're spending your calories. And I'll tell you a story about myself. That's what happened to me. I can't say that I was ever a person that could eat whatever they wanted. I always watched what I ate because I was blessed with a slow metabolism. Like, I didn't just burn all the time. I worked out and I was running after the 3 kids and had a career. But during perimenopause, I gained like 7 or 8 pounds. I'm like, where did that come from? And I figured it out. It was the constant noshing on picking, and I feel like having a handful of M&Ms, so I can't. Well, you can. You can always have the M&Ms, but if you don't want to gain 7 or 8 pounds in your 40s, in your late 40s, maybe you shouldn't.
Right.
So it's really more about how am I going to tighten this up in terms of calories? Because as we age, and this happens to men too, we just don't burn as many calories. And you'd have to be really, 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 really physically active probably to burn as many calories as you did when you were 25, when you were 45. So it's a matter of knowing what I always call it your calorie allowance is, and spending really wisely within that. There's really not a big change. As I said earlier, protein needs are not based on your menopausal status. They're just based on the fact that the research shows that you need this amount to build muscle as you get older. So that's kind of one thing. But once you hit menopause, once your periods are over, that means you really have a lot less estrogen, which means that now that you're no longer having your period, you don't need extra iron, because the only way you were losing iron was through monthly blood loss. Iron is not shed through the skin. You don't pee it out. You don't poop it out. It just goes with the bleeding. Primarily the biggest part of it does. You need more calcium because you don't have as much estrogen, and you need about another 200 milligrams a day of calcium. And you probably need, some omega-3 fatty acids, or make sure your fatty fish intake is way up there for your heart. So your needs don't really change a lot. It's really your calories that I think, and your protein your distribution of protein, carbs, fat is going to be different, because now with the research we know that as you get older, you need more protein. Although I have to say that with older people, they don't really study the 50 to 65-year-olds. It's more like 65 plus, 75 plus. It's like, whoa, what happened to that 15 years in there? But
they also leave out Gen X. They don't go from baby boomer to millennial, and it's like we just got completely skipped over.
Yeah.
So I think this is just like an overall societal trend.
Definitely. We definitely got skipped over. For sure.
I mean,
we're dealing with it though, because we're Gen X.
Yes,
and we deal.
We deal. We're the latchkey kids.
That's right. Right. Yep.
We were the ones where our parents didn't know where the hell we were, and somehow we ended up alive and well.
We're just fine. Yes.
All right. So okay. So that was helpful. So talking about, like your distribution of calories. And one of the things that I started doing a while ago, I have a weightlifting coach and she also helps me with my nutrition. She's not an RDN like you. And so I do some other research as well. But we work on my macros, right? And so I measure my food 3 to 4 times a week. And like I weigh my food. I keep my food pretty boring, truthfully. Because I just keep it boring because I feel like it's just, I know what I'm eating and I want to know about my calories, right? And then this way, when I'm on the weekend and I want to have like a ribeye, I'm just having the ribeye and I don't care, right? Of course. I kind of did the math. Assuming you have 21 meals in a week, I'd say like 16 of them are pretty locked in, right? So that leaves me about 5 meals that I'm not as locked in on, right? Some are less locked in than others. But the thing is that one of the things that I've gone through recently is that I had my hip replaced 5 months ago.
Wow.
And when I started working out again and started lifting again, I was pretty cautious. And then I started to progress. But I was still like on what I would call reduced calories, right? Because I didn't think to up my calories. And I was complaining to my coach, like my workouts were sucking and everything else. She's like, we need to up your carbs, right? Like it's time for you to up your carbs. And sure enough, once I up my carbs, not by a lot, but we upped the carbs, my lifts started getting better. And I actually started dropping some weight because I was able to do that, which I think runs very counter to how society thinks about carbs right now. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the signs of what happens when like you're exercising, because we have women who are strength trained, but maybe they're not getting what they need. They're not getting what they want out of it because maybe they're not consuming the right macro distribution.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely have to, if you're not going to lose, if you're not doing it to lose weight, let's say exercise, you need to decide on a calorie level that's going to be right. It's going to balance out the energy that you're putting into your weight training or whatever exercise you're doing, and figure out that calorie level so that there's some balance. Now, within that, you can only split the pie 3 ways, right? It's either going to be fat, carbohydrate, or protein. And the tendency is just go really, really high on protein. Everybody says, I need protein. Well, if you don't need enough carbohydrate, your body will take some of that protein and use it for energy. And it's a laborious process in terms of converting protein, to glucose that your cells can actually use. And your body really doesn't want to do it. And so you may feel sluggish. And so you are not getting as much out of your workout. So you need the carbohydrate to spare the protein to do its job, which is protein's very special. It has these amino acids, which are the building blocks of everything in your body, everything. And the carb is the most readily used form of energy in the body. Fat is definitely a form of energy, and you probably couldn't be able to satisfy your calorie needs without some fat because it's such a concentrated source of energy. Be eating all day long, probably, if you were just doing carbs and protein. And you wouldn't be healthy either because fat provides an essential fatty acid, which your body cannot make. So that said, you really have to get that balance together and make sure that you're not just choking down protein with some healthy fat and saying, why am I not making gains? Well, because some of that protein's being used for energy. You can't just keep piling on protein. That's not the way the body works. It will divert some of that and it will use energy in order to convert it to glucose, and it's not going to be instantaneous.
Does that differ between genders in terms of how that works?
Not that I know of. I don't think so. Yeah.
So if we're thinking about something like keto, right?
Yeah.
How does that work in terms of someone trying to be very protein focused, getting the fat in, and even like Atkins diet, we're old enough to remember when that was like a thing.
So keto is not a high protein diet. It's a moderate protein diet. It's a very high fat diet. It's about 70% fat. And the idea there is to give your body just enough protein, very, very low carb, very low carb, like almost non-existent. And the idea is to get your body to burn its stored fat by never provoking insulin. So insulin is necessary and will be released from the pancreas when you eat carbohydrates. And so we want the idea with keto is to suppress that so that you head into your fat stores and start burning those up, and you actually produce ketones or ketone bodies. Ketosis is the hallmark of, whether the diet is working or not. So you start burning your fat stores. And that's it. It's really high in fat, very high in fat.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any intermittent fasting or keto or anything that you find doesn't work well for women going through menopause because of all the other shifts that are going on?
Yeah, I think the really strict intermittent fasting. I do intermittent fasting 12 hours a day.
Okay.
I stop. Everyone does intermittent fasting, right? When you stop eating, I try to stop eating by 7, and I don't eat again until 7 in the morning. And that's about as extreme as I'm going to go. But what it does is it really does, shut things down a little bit, calms the system down. You're not always asking for insulin because you're eating, and the body, it's better for the body to rest for 12 hours. There are models where people go, they only eat for 8 hours out of the day. If you're comfortable with that and it's not provoking or triggering any sort of feelings of disordered eating, it's probably okay to do, even with all the other stuff that's going on as a menopausal woman, if you can satisfy all of your nutrient needs within those 8 hours. There's going to be no skipping of meals or anything. It's good because there's no leeway there. There's some really stricter models too of eating everything within 4 hours of a day. I just don't know how you would ever do that without feeling sick, number one, and getting everything that you needed. So if intermittent fasting is bugging you in any way, as a menopausal woman, just know you do not have to do it. There's zero proof that it helps overall, in studies, to lose weight any more than a caloric restriction. Although for some people, they may like having a shut off. I don't eat 7, and then I start again at X, I don't know, whatever time they want to, and they feel like they can control things better with that. It's really up to you.
I find as I've gotten older that we eat dinner, we try and be done by 7:15 typically, especially during the week, unless we're having people over. Because when we go to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock. Right. Yeah. And so, the whole digestive thing and everything else. Yeah. I've now become that person.
I am in the same club because I can't eat too close to bed and I can't eat too heavily because I have reflux now.
Yes. Yes. I'm that person now.
Thank you. And so I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be aggravated all night because I ate too late. I'm just not going to eat that late.
Yeah. So let's talk about beverages. And I know that one of the things that people talk about is reducing your alcohol definitely helps with menopause, your alcohol consumption. But one of the other things I wanted to talk about was around diet soda or soda. And does that contribute to osteoporosis, if you know? And then also, you have a lot more people who are trying to drink more water, but they're using flavored water packets. And what does that do for tooth decay?
Okay, where should we start?
Let's start with the diet soda. Let me start with that. The soda or diet soda.
Okay. And osteoporosis?
Yeah.
Risk. I don't think I've seen very good research that link the two. It would be pretty hard to do like a study that showed cause and effect. You could probably maybe find something that showed an association, but I'm not sure why it would. What the mechanism would be. It might be because it's displacing things like milk, which of course have the calcium and the vitamin D that your bones need. So, what it does to your teeth, though, is something different because the carbonation produces acid in the mouth. And I had a dental hygienist tell me, who's also a professor at Texas A&M and is a registered dietitian as well, told me, look, if you want to have like a Diet Coke or Diet Ginger Ale, whatever, even sparkling water, that what you should do is consume it within a very confined, period, like 20 minutes. Like don't sip on these beverages all day because you are creating that acidic environment in your mouth, and an acidic environment encourages the growth of cavity-causing bacteria. And I'm like, So she wasn't saying don't drink them. She was saying, go ahead, but, within a short period of time. And then, you can always go swish your mouth out with water after you drink when they're plain water, because that neutralizes the acid in your mouth. So that's kind of one thing. So I think I'm more concerned with what they do to your teeth, because that's more of an immediate thing. Certainly if your diet is lacking in calcium and vitamin D and has been for a really, really long time because you've always substituted soft drinks or sparkling drinks for milk or yogurt, that would certainly be an issue.
So sparkling water. So like Pellegrino.
Yeah, I think it's the carbonation.
Wow, because I have a Soda Stream at home. I don't know if you know what a Soda Stream is?
Yep.
Yeah, so I have a Soda Stream.
You're adding carbonation to fluid. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Wow. It's tough because these drinks have always been marketed as, if you don't like to drink water, which I don't personally love water, this is something that you can use. But I think the best thing to do would be to drink plain water. And I hate to say it, but because a lot of people don't like it. But the other thing is, you don't have to go crazy with water. That's another myth.
Okay, great.
Yeah, drinking, you don't have to drink 64 ounces of plain water every day either. And I always tease my girls because they, have the big water bottle and they're always sipping on plain water. I'm like, why are you always so thirsty? Like, what's wrong with you? I don't, when I was a kid, you had a water bubbler, right, in the school, and you took a few sips during the day, and that was it. And we weren't dehydrated, but they like to drink plain water, so that's fine. But, the myth that you have to drink 64 ounces of plain water, it's a myth. And if you look at the recommendations, which come from the Institute of Medicine about fluid intake, it's really, fluid that you should be drinking. Of course, they prefer that you drink, water, but coffee and tea and milk and juice and even Diet Coke, all contribute to your fluid intake. And so do fruits and vegetables. So, and you were talking about boring meals and things. This is very unsexy advice to tell people you need 5 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. Do you want me to go into the laundry list of why you need them? Well, one of the things that would be on there would be because they provide fluid, because they're mostly water, not bananas and things like that, but in the dehydrated fruits, but a green pepper, tomatoes, watermelon, 97% water.
Right.
So, these sometimes when we say things, it sounds like, oh God, not that advice again. There's so much science behind the simple, boring basics.
Yeah, but it's not clickbait, and so people aren't interested in that. But what I think also is interesting, obviously, like if you work out and you sweat, you want to make sure that you're replenishing your fluids, right?
Of course, if you're thirsty, drink.
Right.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I think you kind of covered this, but I just want to call it out specifically because there are people who use like flavored water packets, right? And it sounds like those would be in the tooth decay potential risk if you're using those like flavored packets and what they have in them. Is that fair to say?
I don't know what's in them, so I really can't say.
Okay.
If they have sugar in them, of course, you're
Right.
contributing. If they have artificial sweeteners, probably not, because there's no carbonation and it's just artificial sweetness. But I can't say because I have never really looked at the ingredients.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Let's shift a little bit to supplements, because you and I talked about that in like the pre-call and everything. Now, calcium. You talked about calcium and the importance of taking in calcium. If you're not getting enough calcium in your diet, do you recommend a supplement? Someone mentioned calcium chews to me, which I had never heard of before, which doesn't mean anything that I've never heard of it. But how do people, get their calcium if they can't get it through natural food sources? What do you recommend?
I recommend calcium carbonate, and that's made in a lab, of course. These are pills. Do not use oyster shell. We don't know where those oyster shells have been, and they may be contaminated. So we don't, recommend that. So calcium carbonate, and that's what I take. I mean, I don't get 4 servings of dairy foods every day, which is the equivalent to the recommended amount of calcium after menopause. I get about half of that, and I take half as calcium carbonate. And it's just, regular old Nature Made or something like that. Nothing fancy. It doesn't have to have anything else in it except the calcium carbonate. But the kind of wonderful thing, you could take it in combination with vitamin D if you want.
Yeah, Nature Made makes some a calcium and vitamin D supplement, which I take.
Right. And sometimes there's you can find some with some extra magnesium, but that form of magnesium, you need to be careful because like magnesium oxide can give you like diarrhea. So,
yeah, I learned that one the hard way.
Yeah. We all have to learn hard lessons sometimes. Okay. So if you're beyond menopause, you need 1,200 milligrams of calcium every single day. So that is like 4 servings of dairy. So if you're getting like a cup of milk and a cup of yogurt every day, like that's your consistent, you've already gotten half of what you need. So you only have to take 600 as the supplement. And that's the way I look at it. It actually works out good in terms of the amount that's in food and the amount that's typically in a supplement. Now, taking much more of it is not highly recommended at all because there's really no proof that's going to prevent osteoporosis. You just want to make sure you're getting enough.
Okay, that's good to know because I'm sure people are like, oh, if I go over, does that help me, in terms of my bone density?
Yeah.
So then you mentioned magnesium. So someone said, tell me the supplements that are effective for menopause. Magnesium is up there as one of the ones. And I learned after my experience that there's lots of different types of magnesium, which have different effects. Yeah. We talked about vitamin D. So I've heard ashwagandha. I'm looking at a list that was submitted to me. Ashwagandha, cranberry juice, B12, turmeric. What do you got on the science of that?
Let's go back to magnesium.
Okay.
I did write on my Substack about that. So that's out there. That's free to read.
We'll link to that for sure.
Okay. And, what it came down to is that, a lot of them have the similar effects. Some of them, like milk of magnesia. Let's think about that.
Okay. I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Right. It's still out there. And, milk of magnesia will help you to go to the bathroom, right? So that means that there's a laxative effect to magnesium. We have to be careful about that. It's something we don't want to overdo. You don't need, tons and tons of magnesium in your supplements. It's no magic bullet. It's not going to cure your hot flashes or make your legs be less restless at night or help you to sleep better, but it might, you don't need huge amounts to do that. And, I come down on the side of magnesium glycinate, which is the kind that I take, the form that I take, because it's really gentle on your stomach and, it does the trick. It fills in the gap between, what I'm not getting in the diet and what I should be getting. So there's magnesium. You asked about some other
like ashwagandha, turmeric, cranberry juice. B12 shots.
Yeah, B12 shots you probably don't need unless you're missing part of your stomach. B12 is necessary. Sorry, let me go back to that. There's something in the stomach, a compound that we call the intrinsic factor, I think, because no one knows exactly what it is. But if you're missing it, because you've had some surgery on your stomach, you're missing part of your stomach, you are at risk for a B12. And you want to bypass the gut and make sure that the B12 gets right into your system with a shot. Okay. But for people over 50, it is recommended that you get the bulk of your B12 from a synthetic source of B12. That's found either in foods, like it's added to cereals and pasta, rice, bread. It's recommended that you get the most vitamin B12 as a synthetic form, because as you get older, your levels of stomach acid decrease, and stomach acid is necessary to absorb vitamin B12 naturally. So you need stomach acid. It goes in there, it chops the vitamin B12 off, and it makes it available for your body. But if you don't have enough stomach acid, then there's a potential that you are not going to absorb enough, and you can get nerve damage, and and it's irreversible. So we don't want that. So you're taking a multivitamin every day is going to cover, most of your bases, and definitely your bases for B12. So it's kind of one of those cases where the synthetic form of the vitamin is actually more beneficial.
Yeah, that's rare. You don't hear that very often.
It's the same with folic acid in pregnancy. Folic acid is much more readily absorbed and usable and associated with a lower risk for neural tube defects in infants than folate found naturally in foods.
Wow. All right. Yeah, and then like the other supplements, like
you can try them, but again, there's really no magic bullet for anything. You mentioned the cranberry juice, and I was just wondering, is that to reduce UTIs or
they just put it in there as like menopause symptoms? So I mean, it could be sleep. I think I've heard cranberry juice for sleep, and again, I'm not speaking as an authority on this.
Juice. I think it's cherry.
It's cherry juice. Yes, it's the tart cherry juice. Yeah.
Tart cherry juice mixed with magnesium powder is a thing on TikTok.
But is it a thing in Liz Ward's world?
It's not on my menu, because I'll tell you, I don't drink anything before I go to bed because I don't want to wake up and have to pee. All right, no fluids past
that's it. All right,
past a certain time. And you understand why.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Even if it is going to help me to sleep, I'm going to have to pee, and I'm going to have to wake up, and
then you're going to have to figure out how to fall asleep again.
Yeah. No thanks. Yeah.
All right. So then 3 questions on. So I'll just go through creatine for building muscle and bone density. Is it something you recommend?
If you want to try it, yeah, fine. It's not going to hurt you, and it can potentially help you. Again, I have a Substack article on it.
Okay.
So you try. You just don't want to go like all in on creatine. With creatine, you're supposed to. It will tell you, like any reputable creatine company, like Now Foods or one of those big ones, will tell you how to dose. So you're supposed to. Yeah, you're not, because it can cause bloating.
Right.
So you just kind of load, and then you kind of pull back on the creatine. So don't.
So there's definitely like a cycle that you follow.
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
And there's some evidence that it may be good for your brain. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about probiotics versus fermented food? Do you have an opinion on that?
So probiotic pills, would that be probiotic supplements? Because
like a probiotic supplement versus like eating fermented food.
Okay, so fermented foods are probiotics. They contain probiotics. Probiotics just means living organisms, right?
Right.
So I'm always much bigger on food than I am on supplements. And the reason why I'm not so big on the supplements is because your gut is a community, and we don't know what's in anybody's community, so I mean it varies. There's a lot of commonality amongst humans, but if we just start dumping pills in there with different kinds of strains of different bacteria that are beneficial, are we going to disrupt that community? Like, what does that mean? And I like to go with the idea that, probiotics, their effects are strain specific. So, for example, if the research says that one strain of lactobacillus, I don't know, helps prevent diarrhea when you're taking antibiotics, that doesn't mean that another strain of lactobacillus is going to do the same thing.
Right.
It's really complicated. And I'm not a big fan of just going to the store and going, oh, this brand sounds good, let's do that. So it's a good idea to stick with the foods. But having said that, a probiotic food cannot be pasteurized. Anything that's pasteurized has had all the bacteria killed.
All right.
That's what pasteurization is. So if, let's say you want to have sauerkraut, go to the refrigerated section and get it from there.
Right. Now get the jar from.
No, you cannot get the jar from the shelf because it'll be pasteurized because that's not refrigerated.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we're going to shift a little bit. So in general with menopause, if someone is obese, do you find that it exacerbates menopause symptoms more?
Well, there is research that shows that women who have obesity have a more difficult time with hot flashes. And in fact, like weight loss is really the only thing that kind of works across the board for a lot of women in terms of helping to manage hot flashes. So yeah, I mean, it just makes things more aggravating. To feel that much hotter.
Right.
Although there are plenty of people who would fall into the, normal weight range or way less that have horrible hot flashes. So,
sure.
Everybody is different.
Yeah, that's the one. I think that's the one thing that I think has been consistent is that everyone experiences this so differently. And as someone who was never pregnant, right? Like I can't, I don't have that lived experience, but with menopause, it's so different for everybody.
It is. So, and yeah.
So then we're hearing a lot about plastics in endocrine disruptors and everything else. We're hearing this in the news with the new administration that they're trying to get all the BPA out and everything else. Is there any science around perimenopause or menopause being impacted by these types of things?
No, I've never seen any. And this is a relatively new area of research.
Yeah.
So in terms of PFAS or forever, it's a forever.
Yeah, I didn't know how to pronounce it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's too long of a word. But everyone can remember PFAS.
Right.
Like the FDA in 2024 took PFAS out of all wrappers, like fast food wrappers, anything where it could actually leach into food. And so that was a good move. But yet now this administration is taking the brakes off of, of that and allowing more PFAS to be in drinking water. So,
yeah.
I don't know what to worry about at any given time.
Yeah. When you were talking earlier about vitamin deficiencies, almost like when you're talking about iron, you lose that a lot more when you're menstruating and everything. If I'm going to my doctor, right? Because the hormone thing, you can't really get a test for hormones to find out if you're in perimenopause. Because as you said, your hormones are all over the place. So a test today can indicate something completely different tomorrow, right? But I have to think with vitamin deficiencies, right? There's probably certain things that you may want to get blood tests on to find out if you're deficient in something. Is that true? Not true? What do you think?
It depends. I mean, a lot of times people will say, I'll see it on the internet, oh, get your calcium tested, get your magnesium tested. You will never know if you're deficient in calcium or magnesium from a blood test. And the reason is because most of those minerals are in your bones. That's where they're stored. Only about 1% of your calcium is in your bloodstream. Only about 3% of your magnesium is, in your bloodstream. So, it's just silly for these influencers to keep encouraging people to get tested for things that they can't. With iron, definitely, yeah, you should get your serum ferritin checked, not just your iron. Your serum ferritin is the one that is really telling you if you have the stores of iron stored. Is it actually stored? With other, vitamin D, I think is a good one to get tested. A lot of times they won't do it because it's too expensive and they won't test you for it. But I think if your diet is basically balanced, as dietitians, we go off the diet. We would say, it looks like, for the last 10 years, you haven't been getting enough iron.
Right.
Let's get iron tested, things like that. But I don't know if you have to get your vitamin levels tested.
With the calcium thing, would a DEXA scan help with that? Like in terms of the bone density, like that would be a better use of testing, right?
Oh, for sure. But it's a more expensive.
It's a more expensive test. But the thing is that if you're really concerned about that.
And if you're taking certain medications, your doctor might send you earlier than age 65, which is
it's so ridiculous because by 65, the damage is done. I was on like another show where you're like,
horse is out of the barn. He's gone. But I'm not sure, how much you could even do before that without, really maybe taking a medication that helps to build your bone mass back. Or, menopause does a number on your bones. I would say, it rivals what it does in terms of, your risk of heart disease. It's just crazy.
Right.
You lose such a big amount of your bone mass after, you lose your period. It's something astronomical. Again, why are we doing it on 65-year-olds? How about 55-year-olds?
Well, even like 45 to get a baseline, because then, you know what you're dealing with, right? And
yeah, that would be nice, but you probably have to pay for that one out of your own pocket because there's really nothing.
Yeah, you have to really fight for it. It's like with anything. Yeah. We can have a whole show on everything you got to fight for.
Yes,
exactly. Could do that. Are there specific foods that you have heard that decrease symptoms or exacerbate symptoms of menopause?
Okay. So I think we started talking about alcohol earlier, but
I just mentioned it, like alcohol, like you're definitely told to like eschew alcohol, it like impacts sleep. And I've noticed that too. Like if I have wine, like my sleep is going to be fucked that night.
Right. And I don't see the point of it, if it's going to really bother you. So I was going to say something about alcohol, but then, of course, with my menopause brain, I lost my train of thought. But let's start with alcohol. You talk about exacerbating symptoms. Absolutely. Alcohol, because you can feel so stressed as a midlife woman with everything going on, and you're just so tired from, you didn't get any sleep last night, and then you had to go to work, and then, you just want to have a couple of drinks to unwind. But then you don't get any sleep that night. And then it becomes this cycle.
Right.
And I think alcohol can definitely make symptoms worse. Plus, it's no good for your risk of breast cancer. Anything, like one standard drink a day is just not a good idea for women. And you can't save up all of your drinks for a Friday and Saturday night either. So that's one thing I would say would exacerbate. Sometimes caffeine, really makes things worse for women. They find that, all of a sudden it's making them like really jumpy, really anxious. It's triggering hot flashes. So, if it bothers you, cut it out or cut back on it. I know it's not easy, and I'm a huge coffee fan, so that would be really hard for me. But
Dunkin', you got to go to Dunkin'.
Yeah, Starbucks. Look, we got Yankees, Red Sox, Dunkin', Starbucks thing going on here.
Well, I live in Seattle, so like we're the home of Starbucks, but I thought everyone in Boston has to go to Dunkin'.
No, I'm not a DD fan.
Oh my gosh. No. Anyway, so we digress.
We're not all the same here. So yeah, and then food. Soy. I wanted to talk about soy. getting like 2 servings of soy foods a day has been shown to be helpful for decreasing hot flashes in some women. It does not work in all women.
Mm-hmm.
Having said everything that I just said, I think, really making sure you're getting enough carbohydrate to feed your brain. You're getting the right carbohydrates, the complex ones, sweet potato or white potato even, not chips, candy, and, sugary things, to feed your brain so that you're not maybe feeling as anxious. It definitely helps you to think more clearly, to have that balance in your diet.
I never thought of the carbs with the brain fog.
Oh, yeah.
I think
if you're on a low carb diet, your brain, it's like 2% of your body weight, and it consumes 20% of the glucose.
how much of it is of your body weight?
20%, and it only weighs like 2% of your entire body. So it gives you an idea of how active, your brain is all the time. It's telling everything what to do. So it always needs energy. So if you're on a very low carbohydrate and I'm not really feeling that good, or, I can't really think clearly, you need to feed your brain.
Wow. That, I never thought of it like that, but okay. All right. What do you have in terms of advice for people who suffer from autoimmune and are going through menopause? Because I have 3 autoimmune diseases, and I work with people who have autoimmune, and I find like autoimmune is more art than science in terms of how you manage your quality of life and your symptoms. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not an expert in that area, but I have to say one thing that pops into my mind is, eating an anti-inflammatory diet. And that's really one that's very plant forward. Lots of fruits and vegetables, maybe even more than 5 servings a day. Maybe some more plant proteins as opposed to animal proteins. More soy as opposed to maybe, fatty red meats. You really want to tamp down that inflammation as much as possible. Limiting the sodium in your diet for sure, limiting the added sugars, but all the while making sure that you're getting enough protein and fiber so that you feel good. So like you said, it is an art because everyone's going to be different in that regard. But, I think for menopausal women in general, an anti-inflammatory diet is a great way to go because you have all these aches and pains and you're like, where did that come from? Why do I have joint pain now? Why do I have, why is this inflamed? Why is that inflamed?
Right.
Because of the loss of estrogen, which of course is, annoying you and annoying certain parts of your body because almost your entire body has estrogen receptors. I mean, they're everywhere.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense. So I have one final question on kind of the diet, and and this is one I deliberately wanted to end on before we get into like how people can get in touch with you and find all of your collateral, which is amazing. Where is the room for joyful eating amongst the avalanche of well-meaning but excessive advice for this phase? In other words, which recommendations can a person just like leave behind if they're finding it all just like too much and overly prescriptive?
Well, I have to put in a plug for myself and Hillary, who, are all over the internet with, a lot of joy and putting it into perspective. You don't have to eat, 200 grams of protein a day. You don't have to cut out the foods that you absolutely love out of your diet to be successful during this stage of life and afterwards. There's so many things you don't have to do, and that's what we're really all about. It's the boring basics that get stuff done. There is no magic bullet. There is no one's coming to save you. You're going to have to figure it out for yourself with help from people, knowledgeable people, and work it out for yourself. There's no fad diet that's going to take all the symptoms away, take your weight gain off forever. This is a new balance that we're trying to achieve.
Yes. I call it like playing Tetris because I'm constantly trying to balance like all of it as my body is adjusting, and you just have to be.
I call it whack-a-mole.
Yeah, whack-a-mole. I call it like playing Tetris, because you're constantly adjusting what it is you're doing based on the fact that your body is changing so much, and you're trying to respond, and then your body's responding, and
you're going to live 30 to 40% of your life after menopause.
Yes.
Okay. So this is another stage, and you have to find out how to include the joy every single day. Like, I do not feel restricted at all by the way I eat. I eat chocolate every day. Okay. You have to find your balance. How much are you willing? Yeah. If I didn't eat chocolate, I don't know. Would I be 5 pounds lighter? Perhaps. But I don't know that, and I'm not going to find out. When I go out on the weekend, am I going to have a Cosmo? Absolutely. Of course I am. I'm not going to have 3. I'm only going to have 1. You've got to figure out how to infuse every single day with joy, and not listen to all the advice about deprive. That's the only way, you get the body that you think you're getting, that some influencer has. You're not getting that body.
And you don't know what they did to get that body. No matter what they tell you, you have no idea what they're doing.
And they're like 20 years younger than you. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, when I whip this out, you know what I mean? Because it's like, like, you don't know what they're doing. You know what I mean? Like, you just don't know.
I'm glad that you didn't press that button while we were talking. That's a good sign.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that, what's been great about you answering all these questions, this is what one person wrote to me when they sent in their questions. They're like, these are all basically a theme of how do I do things I read I should do without gaining weight, but still getting strong and resilient. If the answer is cottage cheese, that's cool. Like, literally, that's what someone wrote. And I thought that, like,
cottage cheese can be part of the answer. It's one of my favorite foods.
Yeah, so
if you don't like it, it's not part of your
Right.
answer.
So, okay. All right. I have one final question that's not nutrition related. Jim Rice or Jason Varitek? For those of you, while she's thinking, she's a huge Red Sox fan. I'm a huge Yankees fan, as evidenced by my hat. But I wanted to know, these are two very, legendary Red Sox. Played their whole careers with the Red Sox. And I'm asking her to choose.
Jim Rice is still, he's a commentator on, so I see him every night when I watch the game, and Varitek is the coach. And I'm going to say Varitek because I still have one of his T-shirts.
Okay.
That's how long it's been.
All right. I respect it. Okay. All right. So, Liz, where can people find you? We're going to put all the links and everything in there, but if people want to follow you, where do they find, what platforms are you on? What book do you want to plug? I mean, you and Hillary have written all of this amazing content.
Yeah. So we wrote a book together called The Menopause Diet Plan. And then we're on Facebook and Instagram and Blue Sky as Menopause Diet Plan. So it's not hard to remember. And then I'm on Substack. I write a newsletter over there under Menopause Nutrition, which is free to read and subscribe to.
That's great. And we will have all of this in there. We're going to link to some of the Substack articles that Liz talked about. Liz, one more thing. Do you have, if someone was trying to think about their macros or their calorie type of level, do you have a good calculator on one of your websites, or one that you like, or is that not something you generally do?
No, but in the book there are 3 different calorie levels.
Okay.
And I did 5 days worth of meal plans.
Okay.
And I give the breakdown.
All right. So we'll link to the book for sure. Yeah. I mean, we were going to link to it anyway, but no, that's good to know, because I think that I want people to know that there are resources out there that are trusted, that if people want to do some of this on their own, if they can't afford through their, if their insurance doesn't cover it, to hire someone like a registered an RDN, right?
Right.
That there are some really good resources out there. So we'll do that. So, all right, Liz, This has been amazing. I'm so grateful you agreed to come on the show in spite of my baseball allegiances. I feel like we could, I feel like I have to, like the guy who helps me with the podcast, I feel like we'll have to get the song like, why can't we be friends? Like, is like the outro music. But this has been so helpful to my community. I'm really grateful for your time and your expertise.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. So just to close this out, this is Jill Beck with Going the Distance with Go Long. Again, focusing on accountability via text. Think of me as the good voice on your shoulder, encouraging you to do the things that you want to be doing. So with that, remember, it's your life. Go the distance. Go long.